we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Alrighty, so talking about the Palisades fire in Los Angeles, pretty wild event, pretty intense thing to be a part of. Everyone has their own story to it. Mine starts out a little caught off guard because I'm a fire captain and I work on a ladder truck company that's an ALS company, meaning that we have paramedics. We're at a pretty busy station. That day I was actually on a 72-hour shift. It was day 2. We got pretty beat up the night before. I was already tired thinking about how I'm going to get through the rest of the shift. We knew all about the winds. They were talking all about red wind warnings, and it was on my radar to a degree, but also being on a truck company, we don't respond on wildfires. I don't go out on strike teams. I actually hadn't been out on a strike team in 10, almost 11 years until that day. And I wasn't on the unit that would go. I did know that the engine company at our house was first up for any in county or out of county. It was what we call an XOR, which is mixed Orange County resources. So various departments from Orange County, we have these teams built up and they're ready to launch in about a minute during an immediate need. I did see the fire kick off in LA and it didn't seem that big, the one that was near the Palisades. And I know Malibu had a fire a few months ago and LA County Fire and LA City did not call any outside resources. They just handled it like they usually do. It wasn't even that windy where I was in Orange County yet. And we started popping calls. So I clear a medical aid incident and my battalion chief calls my personal cell phone and says, you need to get back to the station right now. Well, lights and sirens going. We already popped another call. We're en route to another emergency. And I'm like, well, that's impossible. I'm en route to this thing. He's like, you got to hurry. You need to go on this strike team. And I'm like, what strike team? So we run the call. I stay unavailable. We make it back to the station. Bay doors are open. I see all the bags, the coolers, the gear out. These guys are scrambling, loading the engine. I step off. I'm kind of like, you're kidding, right? And he's like, no, you got to go. The battalion chief from the other agency who was going to be our leader was like, he's like, call me on my cell phone. I call him. He goes, hey, are you en route? I'm like, 1 minute. And then he goes, come up on 13 Bravo. That was our travel TAC channel. Go en route. And I'm like, engine 231's en route. And then he's like, meet at Sunset and PCH. We're going in IA, which means initial attack. So I have no time. I'm like, I don't even have my out of town bag. The guys are like, we grabbed it. I'm thinking in my head, I literally haven't unzipped that thing in 10 years. I was a captain for a while on an engine company, did a lot of this stuff. I promoted through the ranks. Then I went into an admin job. I was staff for over 4 years running our training division, which is hiring, promotional tests, stuff like that. I've now been back on the floor for almost a year, but I'm on a truck company and I'm pretty much, that's like a specialty unit for us. So I'm kind of there to stay. I'm not a wildland guy. I'm not an out of town guy. So also my band had a show that weekend, a big show with punk rock karaoke and Angry Samoans, and I play in Taken Days. So I wanted to do that show. I've always balanced work and family and music pretty well. Hadn't missed something yet, but lo and behold, duty calls, and I had about 60 seconds to prep. I left without socks, my uniform shirt, badge. I pretty much grabbed a bag of Valentine's Day candy hearts, which I love, and luckily I had that because that's kind of how I got through the first 30 hours was eating a bag of sugar this big, and grabbed my wallet and put on my wildland boots, and we were gone out the door. And I spun around and told the guys in the rig, none of us normally work together. It was kind of some overtime, some trades. That's not my company. I jumped onto it. I know all the guys really well, but as we're getting on the freeway, I'm like, this is Tuesday around 12:45, 1 o'clock, I think. And I told them, we'll be back on Thursday. Friday, worst case scenario. Because I don't even think structures were burning yet, or maybe a couple. It didn't seem like it was that big of an incident. And then the closer and closer we got, we're starting to look on our phones because, like I said, it's been a busy morning. I don't have time to watch the news or look at my phone. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a big fire. I can see that. And then when we got from the 405, we got on the 10 to go down to like Santa Monica, just past LAX. And the police had shut the freeway down completely. and they move the cones. We go flying through the middle of it, and there's nobody on the 10 freeway. So for anyone listening who's ever been to Los Angeles, you've never seen no one on the 10 freeway.
Okay.
I filmed a little clip on my phone, or the guys were, and we were almost having a minute of laughter, just looking around like, uh-oh, where is everybody? So bad sign, LA, middle of the day, middle of the week, no one's there. That's not good. So we made our way down to PCH in Santa Monica, hooked a ride. Now we're driving down towards where the Palisade community is in LA, and everyone's coming at us. And I saw our battalion chief, who pulled up behind him, got out, shook hands, and he pretty much said, jump back in your rig. When the last unit gets here, we're going. So normally we do these strike teams. We do pre-deployments. We do, we're leaving in 3 hours. We're leaving in 12 hours. And we go to a base camp, and everyone kind of shakes hands and introduces themselves, and you kind of have a minute. And this was one of those ones where, as our other units were stacking up, there was a few faces that were familiar, a couple friends that I saw on the other units, but we did not get a chance to introduce ourselves till almost the third day. Like, I hadn't got everybody's name, hadn't got a handshake. That's how intense this fire was growing super quick. And pretty much when we all got there, we pushed further down PCH. We were just south of Sunset. And when we got there was all the people getting out of their cars, running and leaving their cars in the middle of the road, driving on both sides of the street of Sunset. And we could see structures starting to catch all around it. And then they called in that bulldozer. So the bulldozer came, and again, in my mind, it maybe sounds weird, but this is just kind of any other fire. Like, sure, it's big, but I didn't know it was going to be global news. I didn't know the type of destruction we were up against. I didn't know that the wind activity would continue to increase. It was just, this is a brush fire that's in an urban setting, and it's threatening structures. And that's something that we've dealt with quite a bit. I've seen it a lot in my career in various places. Nothing super abnormal at this point, but once they started bulldozing those cars out of the way, people were getting out of them, and then they were pushing them out of the way, and our engine was kind of bumping up that road, and we're like, okay, this is a big one. So, and then it just kind of went from there. But that's kind of how that kicked off.
So that, I mean, obviously, I think history will show, I would imagine that is the largest fire for California. And would you think it would be probably the largest we've had in the last 100 years in the U.S.? I mean, I don't know statistically, but
yeah, I'm not like a big stat guy. I know property damage. Yes, I did read a thing yesterday, and I'm not super in tune. I don't keep up on the news a whole lot, but
me either.
I actually have enough reality in my life, so I don't watch news. Which I no offense to the news, but the news is entertainment now. It's 24 hours a day, and it's spun to entertain you, and I don't find it entertaining, so I don't watch it. But I did read that about 8,000 structures were destroyed as like the approximate, and I think I heard the number around 13 billion in damage. And I believe that's for Eaton and Palisade. And then there was a couple other smaller fires in the greater Los Angeles area at that time. As far as acreage, I don't think it was the biggest. There were some huge ones. Loss of life, fortunately, it was not. I know there was about near 28 to 30 lives lost in total. I'm surprised it wasn't more. I'm grateful it wasn't more. I don't know how it wasn't more from being there. It was pretty crazy that you could get. It's that part of LA, for anyone who's not familiar, is like, picture this huge, one of the biggest cities in the world, and then literally 20 minutes away, traffic pending, is this kind of wildland urban interface with these mountainous, windy, tight little roads, little canyons, little chutes, and very old streets, very old area. But then it's been purchased by a lot of wealthy, famous people who build these mansions on these lots that probably originally had 1,200 square foot ranch houses 120 years ago, is my guess. And now they're like 4,000 square foot mansions in some of them, and some original homes. And it's a big variety too. And that part of LA, not everybody is a multimillionaire. Not everybody's famous. There's regular people there. There's people who inherited that home or, purchased it at a good time. I'm about to have a big cat come in here.
Yeah.
He's out of here. You're out of here. I'm surrounded in animals, so
that's good.
I got one in my lap, and they're like grabbing me from everywhere.
So when y'all, and I apologize, my background is nothing with fire, but like when something like that, obviously on that massive level, is it just that you're fighting what is in front of you and you're just doing your best to contain it until at some point you can link up, or I don't know, how does that work?
Yeah, so the original people that get there on a wildland fire, you try to pull up to what we would call the ignition point or the back. And then the initial thing they're going to do is start to set up divisions. So once anytime I arrive to an incident as a captain or company officer or skipper, whatever you want to say, if I notice that this incident's going to overwhelm me and who's en route, then I begin to upgrade it to greater alarms. And I start to think about how am I going to build this thing out and try to divide this work. So with a wildland fire, they initially will take like a division Zulu, which will be like a left flank, and a division Alpha, which will be the right flank of the heel or the butt of the fire, and try to work that perimeter. Then they start to forecast where's this thing going to go. And if it's threatening structures straight ahead, then they'll pick center alphabet letters, like J, and start to work your way around and then give these letters a geographical area. So a division for us is like a geographical spot. You own from this street to this street. So they had done some of, quite a bit of that before we got there. Our resource being a mixed strike team from the next county up. It took us about 40 minutes to get there from the alarm to on scene, which is pretty quick actually. And we were Division Charlie out of the gate is what we were called. And I don't think that our strike team leader had time to meet with whoever the division supervisor was, but they gave them an area, and they gave us like the Palisades community. So we were on the radio and they were throwing some streets out and pretty much said, hey, go up, find this street. So I was using Google Earth and I found the street that they wanted me to go to. And then I pretty much knew we got up there, and then we were kind of calling out what we were seeing. I've got, three fully involved houses, a couple attics going, some bushes, a few structures threatened. And then I kind of looked for a spot initially and flipped around, parked there, and said, okay, the house next door is on fire. We're going to take the neighbor. And then we got out and started trying to defend that house. And then it went like that for 14 days, but you just kind of pick something out that you think is defensible. At that time, the winds weren't too bad and the fire activity was moderate. It wasn't, this is 2 p.m. It wasn't too severe quite yet. So I pretty much at that time thought this house isn't going to burn, and what we're looking at, and we're going to probably be good to go. And that ended up not being the case.
And so when you're talking about 14 days like that, that's basically just working, sleeping when you can, if you've got any downtime, like an hour at a time or something, and then you're right back at it?
So the way this one went down, which was a little bit more extreme than normal, was we got there on Tuesday in the middle of the day. We actually didn't get relieved till Thursday at about 1 p.m. So we went 3 days or about 49 straight hours of firefighting without stopping. We did kind of took turns closing your eyes for an hour here or there in the cab of the rig, but we really didn't sleep. And that first day and night, we just grinded. We were on hose lines, bumping and running from thing to thing to thing. We were all over the place initially. Once we were relieved on the Thursday, we were bedded down and we were able, there were so many resources coming in. They put us up in a hotel. And then we got on the normal work cycle, which was a 24 on, 24 off. So after the initial attack few days, we would get a hotel, go have lunch, a late lunch, early dinner type thing, sleep, shower, scrub as much black soot out of your nose and ears and eyes as you could, try to sleep, My feet were super, super swollen. I had all this edema in my legs from standing for 3 days. So
Okay.
like the first day I was like feet on the wall, like, you know, we were a mess. Like my face was almost swollen shut. We were pretty beat up. Then after that, the next day we went on and got a 24-hour work assignment. So we got up at about 4:15 in the morning, wheels at 5, got to the base camp around 6. The strike team leader and the captains and myself, we're a part of the formal briefing at 7, which I believe they were like broadcasting that at least on YouTube and stuff. So it was public because people in the public were saying that they could see the briefings. And then our team was getting radios cloned for TAC channels. They were grabbing ice. They were grabbing these lunch bags that keep us going for up to 24 hours or longer. Any other supplies, if we needed gloves, couplings, nozzles, hose that burned up. We burned up a lot of hose. My company, we lost about 1,000 feet of hose burned up the first night, which is abnormal. And any other gear we need, shovels, whatnot, at the base. And then after our big meeting, the strike team leaders or any resource leader overhead will meet with the division supervisor for the day. And then they do a division breakout, decide, okay, we spent most of our time in Charlie. That was the Palisades and the Huntington Palisades, through Riviera, Mandeville Canyon. A lot of the stuff you saw in the news, we were in a really hot spot. And then they would come back after the division breakout and go, okay, we're going to go to a DP or drop point. We have all these maps. We go to a drop point, meet up, and then kind of pull up the topo maps and decide what are we going to do today. And every day was a totally different mission. And as the incident stabilized and the fire activity decreased and the calls for service in the area decreased, our missions varied. Some of them were kind of diplomatic and supporting the community and trying to restore some normalcy. Some of them were hiking in the hills, dragging hose lines, cutting line, which means moving bushes and trees and dragging down to bare mineral soil. Some of it was guarding certain streets that were threatened, all kinds of different jobs. And so our team was on a 14-day cycle before we were demobilized. We were 1 day away from being relieved in the field, meaning that if they needed that XOR team, that they could have kept the equipment and we would have refreshed the 22 bodies of men and women that were on our team. We would have got all new, fresh people had they needed us any longer. But we actually went the full run 14, which is what we agree to do. Anytime you step into that seat and you go off, pretty much the city, state, feds, whoever's in charge, they kind of own you for 14 days.
Okay.
That's the commitment.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like, running low on supplies or burning up hose, I mean, I would assume a lot of that you already have contingency plans like, hey, this is kind of normal, but like you said, that was a little abnormal to burn up, 1,000 foot of line. What else were y'all like running low on or depleting out of?
So that first evening, I wish I knew what time it was. When we were in the Palisades community, the first thing I noticed was there aren't very many fire hydrants. And the ones that are there are what we call like a dwarf fire hydrant, which means it's a little 2.5-inch opening and just one little 2.5-inch opening. And they seemed to be every 800 to 1,200 feet or worse. Whereas like in the suburban community that I work as a city firefighter, we have every 300 feet or 350, and that's residential and like industrial commercial. We have these wet barrel hydrants that have a big 4-inch opening and then usually 1 or 2 2.5s, and the pressure on those is pretty high. It's like 60 psi or 70. 40 would be kind of a crappy one. Well, these dwarf hydrants in the Palisade community, we hooked up to them initially and they were barely kind of trickling out water, like not what you'd want to see. And initially, to me, that's not that weird for what we call a WUI neighborhood, WWUI, which means wildland urban interface, which is homes that are nestled into the wildland community. Especially a lot of them are older communities like the Palisades. I'm going to guess that's a 120-year-old neighborhood. I don't know, maybe more. Mm-hmm. So that infrastructure was never designed to have a bunch of fire engines hook up to these and draw all at once. I'm sure it's enough water if one house catches on fire, probably not a problem. But when you have that many engine companies hook up to a water source, it's just not going to work. It's not designed to do that, no matter what. So I've been on multiple strike teams where we've run out of water. The fireman that was on my rig had a video he showed us later of, I think it was the Thomas Fire, one of them, where they were opening up hydrants, and you could feel air sucking because there were so many pumpers trying to draw water that not only is no water coming, it would like suck your hand in if you put your hand in front of it.
Oh, okay.
So that type of thing is not the craziest scenario I've ever seen or thought of. It's somewhat expected. We have a 500-gallon tank on our unit, and we're conservative. We were sticking garden hoses in the truck. In the top, there's a tank that just to kind of trickle in as we were going, and we were noticing the water situation was not going to be good. So when we initially really started fighting some fire, we were kind of doing a shuttle move where one rig would be pumping a fire, another rig would drive to a hydrant, fill up, hook up, push their 500 into their 500 while they're flowing. And then we were kind of supporting each other in that way. And even that was hard. A couple water tenders came by at one point. And then what happened to us, and it was bad timing on my part, I will admit, is we had a large, I'll call it a mansion, a huge residence that was going pretty good. And it had threatened the home next door and blew out a window and started burning. One of our engines in our team used the rear stairs, went inside, put that bedroom out. And then they bumped to another spot. So I saw that and thought, well, if we go up there and lay in off this hydrant and deck gun and put some big lines on, we're not going to put that house out. We can't by ourselves, not safely, but we can probably keep the neighbors on both sides from burning. So my strike team leader came by and said, I agree with that plan. I think you should hit that. Why don't you anchor in? This looks like a good spot. So we did that. We laid about 500 feet of hose down the street, put big water, and we were making a pretty big impact. And I'm thinking, these neighbors' houses are going to be fine. So we were kind of doing that whole thing. And then all of a sudden, I don't know how long we were engaged in that activity, but the hose lines went down. I ran around, and my engineer's at the panel, and he's grabbing the hose behind him, and there's nothing coming down it. Well, previously some crews had shut it on and off a couple times because they were filling up off of it while we were using it. And now the wind is really picking up, and it's like just this red sky. And I've got a little thing over my face and my goggles. Smoke is in my eyes. We're being rained by embers, and I can't even see 500 feet. And I'm like, did someone I'm like, I think they just shut it off. And then he goes, no, our other unit went on and they put a gated Y. So last time they shut it off, they did a gate with 2 levers so we could flow and other companies could come by and fill off of it. So I'm like, maybe somebody shut it off on accident. So my engineer ran downhill 500 feet and then calls me on the radio and goes, it's wide open. So he comes back up the street and I go, I walk over to the house next door that's not burning, flip on their garden hose, and it's not working. So we're like, okay, the water's gone. So little team huddle, like quarterback style, let's huddle up. I'm like, okay, it's probably going to kick back on. There could have been a loss of power to pumps, or everybody's hooking up. We're up this ridge. It's going to come back on. So we're not going to do anything drastic yet. We're going to chill. And if this gets worse and we start to get overrun, we're going to have to disconnect and take off. We're not going to have time to clean up all of our equipment because we were pretty committed. So we were waiting it out. An LA City medic unit pulls up behind me, and he said, hey, there's a lady or a couple people in this house right here that won't leave, right? And I go, yeah, it's that one. They won't answer the door anymore. I've pounded on it like 3 times. I don't know if they left. There's that car in the driveway. There's a car on the side. I don't know if they left or not, but they're not answering the door. I was pounding on it. You're welcome to try. And I also told them, hey, we just ran out of water and it's getting bad. We might have to bail out of here. So just keep your head on a swivel. And then the winds probably kicked up to, I'm going to guess 80 to 100 miles an hour. And I mean, we had just walls of fire, and the embers were just, it was unbelievably hot. And it was like, okay, we're done. So we started disconnecting everything. I'm like, we got to bail, leave the hose on the ground. We were positioned to leave, so we just disconnect. We had already talked about who was going to disconnect what. I mean, it took us 10 seconds to be ready to go. And as we left, I could see some of our hose, the radiant heat and the embers, our hoses were catching on fire, which is definitely a problem. And we drove down that hill. The guys from the medic unit were running out like they looked like they were surrounded by a swarm of bees. I mean, it was just so hot and so intense, and we were defenseless in that time. And they jumped in their rig, and we all drove down the street to kind of where we weren't getting hit by so much fire. And we waited. We got out, and then I said, let's let the wind die down. And then we all bundled up as best we could with what we had. Four of us walked shoulder and shoulder back up that hill and grabbed our hoses and started dragging them back down. And some of them were burning, some of them had burnt up. And then I'm like, let's get the nozzles. Let's just drag everything down to the bottom of this hill where we can actually see and think, go through what isn't completely destroyed, and load it back up on our rig and get ready to move to another spot. And I think we had about 400 feet of supply burn up on that one, and some of our 1.5 inch was burnt up. But we got all the nozzles and all the stuff back, and none of us were hurt. Some of the guys had some little tiny burns, a lot of smoke inhalation, a lot of smoke in the eyes and in the ears and in the nose and stuff. But that seemed like a pretty epic moment for us. And to be honest, that was just the tip of the iceberg getting started. Like the evening just continued from there, and it just got crazier and crazier. And we drove a couple of neighborhoods over and tried to find hydrants, and none of them were on. So we ended up moving from the Palisades over to what's called the Huntington Palisades, because we had heard that there were very few resources over there, and they were getting crushed with fire. So we went over there. Those hydrants were working, and that was a pretty relentless, I'll call it a 17-hour firefight. Our engine alone probably fought about 30 house fires by ourselves. There wasn't even enough of us really in there. We never really buddied up with anybody. We would walk up and talk to another company for a minute. Hey, where are you going? Where have you been? What have you seen? And at that point, the winds were just sustained. I would say consistently 50, 60 miles with gusts 80 to 100. And it just looked like hellfire or like Godzilla. A kind of funny story is days and days later, when I was FaceTiming with my family, my girlfriend's son is 9, and he's super sweet, and he was scared, and he's asking me, what was it like? And I'm like, buddy, it was kind of like Godzilla, because he's got a Godzilla poster, the movies, the toys and everything. And you know how honest the kids are. He goes, no, Godzilla burned down an entire state. That was just a city. And I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, you got me, man. You're right.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. Okay, always leave it to a kid to humble you. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I just looked at that. So,
yeah. So now, did you have any, like what we would call rookies or slick sleeves? Like, did you have any newer members on your crew that had never really even been in a fire yet or been that experienced?
So one of the firefighters he's not a probie. He's not necessarily a rookie. He's about a 2-year guy. But just by sheer coincidence, I want to say he said this was his 4th strike team at the time. So he'd been on a couple. He'd had some pretty good experience, and he was doing great. Like he wasn't overwhelmed or didn't need direction by me. He wasn't lost by any sense. And then my engineer Corey was a newly promoted engineer. He's about a 12 to 15-year guy. So a lot of experience. And he had a lot of time moving up as an engineer, but this was his first strike team driving as an engineer. So he definitely got a lot of experience out of it, did fantastic. Myself I've been a captain for over 11 years, I think. So I was comfortable in what I was doing. I have over 20 years on in fire. So seen enough things to where only in these moments, and you can relate from your law enforcement career, there's a lot of times things that are the worst day of somebody's life, a major emergency. To us, it barely gets our heart rate up, because not that we're insensitive or immune to it, but just that we've been there, done that, seen this.
Yeah.
I can wrap my head around it, and I know what's happened for the most part, and I know what's going to happen. Incidents like this is when your heart rate gets up, because you're like, I don't exactly know how this is going to go. And I'm in charge of my safety, my company's lives and safety, and then all the other crews we're working with. And there are hazards everywhere. We had propane tanks going off, we had power lines dropping, we had structures collapsing. Very early in the incident, I earned a new nickname called Near Miss, because I went into a backyard to decide, can we go through the slider and knock down this attic of this house, yes or no? And I'm kind of thinking about it. I've got a couple firemen from another company with some hoses behind me. I'm looking at them. Well, don't drag them over here. Let me take a look. And I hear like a guh, and I look up and I see the chimney fall. And so I didn't freeze, but I didn't run. I stood completely still and slowly moved under this tree, and I just looked at it, and I hear these guys screaming my name behind me, and I got some other guys over here who can see me screaming. And I watched it slide, because my thought is, I've had things collapse before. I want to see where it's going to go. If I turn around and run, I can't see anything. So I stood there, and then as it went, I took a couple steps to my left, and this entire chimney fell right to my right. And I turned around and walked back towards them, and these guys are screaming at me, and they're like, "You just stood there. What the heck are you doing?" I go, "I didn't stand anywhere. I'm watching it. Like, I don't want it to land. I turn around, it's going to land on me." I wanted to see where it was going to go. And so they were like, "Man, near miss. Look at you." And then it just it kind of went from there. I fell into a pool later that night that luckily had one of those covers that you can't fall through. So there was so much fire. I looked at it, I thought it was concrete, and I was pulling a guy who was on a hose line back, and I just fell into this thing. So he's like, "Near miss again, look at you." And then we had some I parked had our rig parked close to a house where some propane tanks started exploding. So I'm like, no, let's go. And they're like, "Man, you just can't get out of your own way." So, which is, kind of the way it is. But
and it's one of those things. The reason I asked about like a rookie or a newer person on the crew, same thing. Like it either makes them or breaks them. And I've seen people, or like their first few days, like when I was a training officer in the field in my district, is highest crime rate, a lot of gang activity, a lot of violence, unfortunately. So I could take a rookie right out of the academy and get them into something. We're getting into a foot pursuit, use of force, someone cussing them out or threatening them or whatever. Like, you can kind of start to gauge the way they're going to be. But one of the best people I've ever worked with, he was one of my rookies, and his first day, right out of the gate, we go right to a call, supposedly gang members with a gun. We jump out of the car, we prone them out, we search them, document them. Nobody's got a gun, cut them loose. About an hour or two later, we go to a kidnapping where a guy's physically kidnapped, pistol whipped, shot, and dumped. And I don't know how many thousands of dollars stolen from him, but he was running an illegal brothel. So a crew knew about it. So we deal with that. And then we end the shift with a murder, like responding to a murder. And so it's a 12-hour shift that ended up being, I don't know, however many hours. But it was like, at the end of the shift, he's just like, whoa. And I said, yeah. It usually gets pretty busy, so just kind of hang in there. But today wasn't too bad, And he was just like, "Whoa!" I said, "No, dude, we're probably not going to have another day like this. That's going to be so back to back for you. You'll have a chance to kind of catch your breath." But from that, the only speed he knew was 100 miles an hour. So it was like, it kind of hooked him very early on. Like, okay, everybody knows what they're doing. If guns are drawn, everybody's pretty safe. And then other incidents where, people get the use of force and they start to kind of question if they want to do that kind of work, or maybe they see something horrible, a car crash or a murder or suicide. And then, they realize like, this isn't for me. But I just was thinking about like that being at some point, somebody in that entire area has got to be an early on rookie, and kind of their baptism is this. So now you mentioned earlier your background in fire at one point. You've done training and that sort of thing. And I'm assuming, is that more of like an academy environment where you've got people that you're training up?
For our department, we do joint training with like the neighboring agencies. So me being a training officer in an admin spot mean that I was working a 40-hour work week with a large blanket of responsibilities and jobs. But for the most part, my main mission was to train firefighting for our personnel that are on the floor now, is continuous classes, drills, education, latest, greatest, new technology, new equipment, on top of running promotional tests and promotional academies to prepare them to promote to upper ranks, and then as well as our hiring process and onboarding new employees, running our recruit academy. So for the agency I work for, to apply for us, you already have to go through firefighting school and an academy and be like state accredited, and then you're already an EMT, and our whole department is ALS, which means we're all paramedics. So you also have to have a paramedic license. So to get to us, nobody is, we still call them green, but nobody is completely green. You're at least a paramedic who's a certified trained firefighter. It doesn't mean you have a whole ton of field experience. So I get everything from laterals who teach me things from their other agency coming in, and to a kid who's, like you said, hasn't been to very many murders, suicides, bad car accidents, hasn't been on a burning roof wondering if they're going to make it off of it, hasn't been into a burning structure and wondered, wait, where's my hose line? How do I get out of here? Am I going to die here? And hasn't seen much death and carnage. You know, not all of them are completely battle tested. And usually it goes one way or the other. You have the, what do you say? A white cloud's the one that they just drift through the first few years of their career and they're never really at the big thing. And then you have the dark clouds, or a shit magnet is kind of my entire career, where I think as a 19-year-old on the fire department ambulance, it was like day one was like drowning in the harbor, fatal car accident, where I picked up the guy's foot and threw it in a bag. That was like my first shift. My whole career has kind of gone that way. And as I've promoted, I feel like I always get this tidal wave of a first day or a first year, which, yeah, that's that trial by fire thing. And at this point in my career, I'm super comfortable in the rank of captain. But absolutely, by no means, anytime I would never think that I've seen it all, because you just keep getting your mind blown, one thing after the next. You're like, I never thought this was possible, or I never thought I would see this, or I never thought this could happen here today, right now. And it's in front of me. So yeah, you just kind of roll with it.
Yeah, when you mentioned being 19 and picking up a foot and putting it in a bag, I think for a lot of people, it's hard for them to remember that firefighters are sometimes, first on the scene of collisions or anything where someone is hurt. At least that's the way it is in the South. I'm assuming that's the same for other areas where you're rolling in. So the age of 19, was that when you got into firefighting?
Yeah. Yep. I was, so I grew up as like a skateboarder, punk rock kid, surfer, snowboarder in Southern California. Didn't really want to be a firefighter, which is bizarre. I had played music. I'd played classical music in an orchestra throughout elementary school, junior high, and into high school. The trumpet was my main thing, but I also played guitar. And I think around 11 years old, I had a garage band, and we were playing Misfits and Descendants and Black Flag and Minor Threat songs and Bad Religion and NoFX songs. And, I got into punk rock through MTV in 1993, and I kind of transitioned from listening to Nirvana and Pearl Jam to listening to my three favorite records that year were Green Day Dookie, Offspring Smash, and the Weezer Blue Album. And that kind of made me think I was punk rock at that time, because I didn't, I knew who the Ramones and the Sex Pistols were probably, but I wasn't listening to it. And then I remember I was out skateboarding one day in like 6th grade, and I ran into some kids from another school, and they're like, come skate with us. So like, we're all skating, and I went to a kid's house who I just hung out with this kid like a couple months ago. We went and watched Donuts and Glory play, became a best friend of mine. And he was like, what other punk bands do you like? And I'm like, I don't know. And I think he made me tapes like there on the spot. He's like, here's Bad Religion, here's Pennywise, here's NoFX, here's TSOL, here's the Misfits, here's Operation Ivy. And Operation Ivy is no longer Operation Ivy. They just did a new record. It's Rancid.
Yeah.
It was like, okay. And I remember getting like all these tapes and like skateboarding home, and just my entire life changed. And I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to be the same.
Yeah.
and I wasn't. It changed me. I immersed myself in the Orange County punk rock scene at that time, which was the guys in Blink 182 were still in high school, I think. We would go see them play, and they were just the kids who were a little bit older than us who had a fast band, and bands like Unwritten Law and Homegrown, Real Big Fish, and the whole ska thing was going. But every time I'm wearing a Vandal shirt. Every time the Vandals would play, or Pennywise, or NoFX, we were there, and playing in our punk bands that we were covering those songs and writing songs, and that was my life. All I ever really wanted to do was playing a punk band.
And that I tell a lot of people this, and there's like always this like running joke about how much I'll mention punk on the show or whatever, but there's something to that. Like when you talked about your buddy making you tapes and you started listening to them, and it was like, I use the word addictive, and people are like, oh, be careful with that, be sensitive. I'm like, no, I mean, like legitimately, when I first heard it, and for me, I had been into like heavy metal because I had an older brother and his older friends. So I was in like third grade, fourth grade, listening to Dio, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, stuff like that. But then in fifth grade, I'm like 10 years old, and that's when I hear Suicidal Tendencies, Dead Kennedys, Minor Threat. And to me, it was like, okay, I couldn't get down necessarily with like the heavy metal stuff. I like the energy, so to speak, the speed of it, but I was so young. But when I started hearing those bands, for me, it was just like, this makes sense. It's almost like speaking my same language. Like I really enjoy either the idea of questioning things that all these Dead Kennedy songs were teaching me, or Minor Threat. Like, hey, not into drinking, not into drugs, Small Man, Big Mouth, like all these songs that I was just like, man, this is so straight and to the point. And it was almost like this little crew of us that everybody got in those same bands, everybody skated, same thing. Like, and this would have been, mid 80s, and through the mid 80s all the way into the very early 90s, it was like that. And it was just like the stereotype being in the South of, dudes in Camaros and pickup trucks chasing us, and we're getting jumped and fights, and shows were going on because I was in a larger city in the South. So we did have bands coming through, and that was the big thing for me. Once I started being able to go to shows, dude, the whole world opened up. Like, man, this is nuts. Like all these kids are coming from all over the state and the area to come see a band play. And that when were some of the first shows that you were able to go to?
And exactly. And I'll talk about that. And one thing, when you said like Dead Kennedys and Suicidal Tendencies, so my life took the kind of trajectory, and we'll get there, as after being a fireman for a long time, I got back into playing bands. I've played shows with the Dead Kennedys and Suicidal Tendencies and hung out with those guys. So that's how weird life is, where I was that 11, 12-year-old listening to Dead Kennedys on my skateboard on a burned cassette tape. Mm-hmm. And then as an adult, I'm playing shows with them. So what a world. But the early shows, I started going in probably 7th grade. So I would have been 11 to 12. I'm a 1 year younger than everyone in my grade. So like I graduated high school. I was in college at 17. So when I say 11, some people are like, yeah, right. But I was 11 in 7th grade. So we started going. My first show ever was the Real Big Fish, Aquabats, Game Face, and Longfellow. At the venue of the show I just missed the other day because of the fire. It was called the Galaxy then. Now it's the Observatory. So everything kind of comes full circle. Was totally addicted from then. And then it was anytime anyone's parents would drive us anywhere in Orange County, San Diego, Corona, Riverside, Los Angeles, anywhere we could get a ride to a show, we were going to go, and we get dropped off. And I loved how welcoming the punk rock community was. It was all these different people, and it doesn't matter who you are, what color your skin is, who you fall in love with, who you think should be a politician or shouldn't. It was just this world where we all found common ground over these bands and this movement. And the movement was, F authority, question everything, don't trust anything you see or read. We have each other. And that, I gravitated to it right away. And Warped Tour kicked off a few years later in like 97, or I think it started in 95 with like Sublime. 96 I was gonna go, but then like I don't remember if I was in trouble or grounded or whatever, but I didn't. And then like my friend had a digital camera and he took pictures. It's like, this is Civ from Gorilla Biscuits. Here's no effects. And I remember like, oh my God, like how did I miss? So, you know, like I'll get straight A's, like whatever it takes, you know. And like I went the next year and saw Blink 182 open it within Melancholy, and Gwen Stefani sang with the Vandals, Social D played. It was my second time seeing the Descendants, because when I became a Descendants fan, they weren't a band, but then they did Everything Sucks and they came back. I went to the Hollywood Palladium to see them with the Suicide Machines in 97 or 96, whatever year it was.
No, you're right. I think it was 97 because I saw the same tour in Nashville. I was in the Army at the time. And I've told this story before, but Descendants, Suicide Machines, and Shades Apart, which I think were a band out of Virginia, were one of the early openers. But I talked with the lead singer from Suicide Machines in between the sets.
Yeah.
And he was just tripping out on like me talking about being in an infantry unit in the Army. And he was very respectful, but it was like, how are you like in the Army and the infantry and also this punk rock kid? And like for me, it was just, I don't like bullies, man. So the world has bullies, and this is what I want to do. But no, when you mentioned the Warped Tour and Civ and seeing these things, so, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but like it's interesting. It's always interesting to me how everyone's lives are going parallel, and we see some of the same bands and the same shows, and it's crazy to know that like you're going to eventually be doing firefighting. You know what I mean? But you're this punk rock kid, you know, like, and probably, you know, I'm sure it was the same way out there as it was here in the early 90s, mid 90s. You probably were still seeing like adults would probably look at you, oh, he's going to be a troublemaker, you know, or he's this street punk, you know, kid that's, I hate saying it, like good for nothing. That's what we heard all the time.
Oh yeah. And like skateboarding was basically illegal. And at that time I was living in Irvine, which if you've ever heard of Irvine is like, was the master plan perfect community of the world. And if you had a skateboard and a chain wallet and spiked belt and like your hair was all spiked everywhere like ours was, and you were wearing a Rancid shirt, you were pretty much treated like a gang member. And like we got shook down by the police everywhere we went. I sat on every curb in that entire city at one point in my life and got chased and hopped walls, ran through backyards, got on roofs, like whatever we had to do. And really, I mean, we were little shitheads, I'll admit, but at the same time, we weren't criminals, and we all had good hearts. That whole crew of kids, minus the few who maybe struggled with substance abuse down the road, but for the most part, we all came, maybe not pillars of the community, but successful adults, you know. And punk rock was a little less safe then, for sure. And going to the shows was not necessarily safe. There was a big racist skinhead component to Orange County at that time. We would see skinheads at US Bomb shows, Rancid shows, Social D. There'd be skinheads and like straight up freaking Nazis, and you knew a fight was going to break out because the guys with the Mohawks were going to beat up those Nazis at some point. Yeah. And now it's a lot safer. And I kind of think, so like when I was doing all that stuff, I loved all kinds of music, and I would go see Dave Matthews Band and Fish, or like Roger Waters from Pink Floyd. Like when he would tour, we would like go watch those bands too, because I love classic rock and the Beatles and Zeppelin and everything too. But I remember thinking like, man, these people are so boring at these shows. But now punk rock is classic rock, because I'm 42 and I play in, as you know, in Taken Days, and our core audience is 30s to 60s. You know, those are our people. So young people and kids like our band too, but a lot of our shows are 21 and over. We're playing tomorrow. It's 21 and over. Punk rock's for adults, man. And it's pretty safe.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm going to come back to your band Taken Days, but when we talk about the scene being dangerous back then and the whole skinhead movement, it's funny because I grew up in that. Like I grew up in listening to a lot of New York hardcore bands early on, man, like 87, 88. So here I am, this little kid in middle school, shaved head, wearing a Judge T-shirt or Gorilla Biscuits or whatever, and nobody understood any of that stuff. But they did know there was a Nazi skinhead movement because of talk shows and things like that.
Yeah.
But in reality, yeah, they would show up and fights would go on. And I was in the police academy, and I kept it quiet. And I did my initial interview when I got hired. I grew up in the same city that I worked in. And I had relatives who had been arrested. And I've got an uncle I talk about a lot that he was one of the most arrested people in my city. Like, he was a frequent flyer. He battled addiction. Sadly, he was homeless from time to time. But so on the applications, you have to put all that. So they knew my family background. But I also disclosed, hey, I came from this punk rock and hardcore scene, and I have a very strong working knowledge of Nazi skinhead movement, as well as, or the racist movement, as well as the traditional original skinhead movement, and trying to explain to a police recruiter, hey, you all had a murder several years ago in this scene, and I don't know whether your officers knew that scene. Anyway, that sort of thing. Yeah. So for my career, I'd worked gangs, I'd worked, homicides off and on as detective, sergeant, lieutenant, all this stuff. But I developed training for my own department to be able to teach them how to spot and know the difference, like on flight jackets and patches and some of the subtleties. And then also, this is how not to offend somebody. Like, you as an officer walking up to a skinhead who is not a racist, it's like this idea of, hey, don't offend them by assuming they're the bad guy or whatever. Yeah. So even in the training, a lot of people, like, their eyes were open, because I've got like the whole history of skinheads and how it, morphed from Jamaica to England to America. But either way, it was like coming full circle, where I felt like, man, I feel like now people are realizing, people that grew up in the scene, we are contributing. Like my heart is in this 100%. Like, I love my job. I love, creating training. I love doing FBI task force. Like, I love all these assignments because to me it mattered. Like, in the same way, you're fighting fires, and it's like this idea of what were rebellious kind of kids and running from the police. Same thing. I did the same thing. And I tell stories like that all the time. But it's like this idea of, I think individually we have that at that core. I'm not just going to follow things blindly. And therefore, if I go into a field where people's lives are on the line, I'm always going to, and I'm saying I, as in the movement, like, kind of, we question it. We go, okay, hey, is this the best way to go? I know you taught me this way, but I am an individual, and I do question it. Hey, maybe we want to do a different tactic, or hey, maybe we want to change this, or maybe we want to help change some of our own professional culture. That was my thing, was like always, hey, I want every officer I work with to be the best, and they were, and then to be able to have encounters with people and change their perspective so they don't hate the police at every turn.
Yeah, for sure. And I have the luxury of being a firefighter where, like, when we're talking to gang members or interacting with them in some way, they're usually kind of pissed off at the police sometimes. So I always have the ability to play, I'm not a cop, but the good cop. I can just walk right up and go, hey, man, how you doing? Hi, my name's Brent. I respect you. What's your name? And then it's like, you just talk to them like they're a person, even if they might be up to some pretty bad shit. It's like, let's start this with a conversation and then kind of see where it goes. I'm not going to assume anything about you. You don't assume anything about me. I don't want to be here any more than you do, but let's kind of get through what this is and figure out what our problem is, and then what route we're going to take with it. But yeah, learning how to talk to people. And same thing with the skinhead thing. I mean, not all skinheads are racist, and you can definitely spot the difference. I can spot the difference. I haven't seen a racist skinhead in so long. I don't know if I could anymore. Thank God they were flushed out of this area. But when I was a kid, I could tell because the punk rock music is not about racism. It's the polar opposite of that. It's anti-racism all the way. Nazi skinheads liked the beat. They liked the fast, aggressive music, and they would come out, and they were also just looking to cause trouble. But the media in the 80s and 90s made punk rock look as though it was a racist movement, and it absolutely was not. And the Dead Kennedys, the Circle Jerks, the Descendants, Black Flag, those bands, Minor Threat, were so opposite racism. And the real followers of that, and the skinheads who were not racist, and the punk rockers who were not racist, and the bikers would beat the shit out of those Nazis when they would show up. And eventually the police kind of eradicated them from like Orange County. I'm sure it's still everywhere, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because when I was a kid, that was like my worst fear, because it felt like, man, this stuff is spreading. More and more guys are showing up at scenes, and you're hearing a lot more about it. And like you said, it legit was like an organic thing. Once someone showed their true colors, so to speak. So we'd have like a lot of guys that would go to shows and not have any kind of markings, like nothing on their jackets, anything, and then go in and like attack one person. But the network of people started figuring out, hey, that dude's, a Nazi or a bonehead out of whatever city or town. And it was like, as soon as people would see him, they'd jump him. But I do remember like such a violent pushback of like, it won't be at our shows. Like that was the running theme. And I loved like listening to bands. And I talk about it too, about back then, about how we all had to write letters to bands and stuff to like get them to play shows, or doing a fanzine, like, that sort of thing of like, and everybody just sharing information. And now all these stories come out about like riots that were happening where like H2O and Sick of It All were playing the show, and they're like having to fight Nazis with like trash cans and stuff, just because certain areas it had gotten so wild and the numbers growing. And I've had guests on in the past who were in that movement, who were Nazi skinheads, and then, through their own epiphany and life choices, they convert and kind of come back to reality. Mm-hmm. And like one guy actually worked to convert a lot of people and get them out of that scene. But for me, like part of the intel world, I worked intel for a couple of years as a sergeant, and I had, gang detectives, gang intel stuff. And that was part of also the push was like, hey, there are certain organizations such as like Hammerskins, things like that, that are an organization and that can be addressed that way. And even if they aren't necessarily in our area or our region, we have to connect the dots, because it spreads and it'll pop up. And anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but the idea sometimes can be out there of like, man, there's such a huge movement there, like you're saying, like this image of punk and hardcore being a bunch of racist kids. And I've heard it in the past where people have been like, well, look at the crowd. It's all a bunch of white dudes. And I'm like, but that doesn't mean they're racist. Like, it blows my mind. Because when you're in the scene, it's like, it's like you said, it's the opposite. Like my family taught me my core values, my friends, the music scene. And so when I joined the Army, it's the same thing. It was like, dude, everybody is pretty much cool, and they show you their character and you move on. Like, as long as people are just cool to one another, like that's how everybody I assess. It's like, okay, I don't care necessarily what your job is, your pigment, any of that. I don't care about any of that. Are you a good person? Do you treat other people in a positive way? That's the main thing. And so what's crazy when you talk about like your audience being older, there's this wave of younger people. When I say young, like 15 to like 20, that are starting these bands. And one of the first, there's two bands that come off the top of my head. Orphan Riot out of North Carolina, like out in the East Coast area. And I think out of Florida, but it's Billy Bats and the Made Men. And these guys are like, well, when they started, they were like young. Yeah. And they're playing like legit punk that when I hear it, it's nostalgic for me. Like go back and be like, man. And like that Billy Bats band, they're really picking up a lot of steam. And so when they play and you see them wearing, old like Vandals t-shirts and stuff like that, it's just this idea of it doesn't die out, even though I would have told you 20 years ago, the scene's going to die out. People are going to be sick of this music, or, it's going to evolve so much that people age out. And because it's true and it's to its roots, I don't think it can die out. I mean, You're a
No.
testament to that, like you
No,
got picking days and y'all are playing shows and doing it,
Exactly, and there's a lot of great up and coming bands. Punk's not dead. Hardcore is exploding. I mean, look at what Turnstile's done to hardcore.
Yeah.
They're used to be more of a hardcore band, but they definitely have that hardcore background and influence. They're fantastic. Ska's kind of making a big push on a
Yeah.
comeback,
Yeah.
and it's a very exciting time to be in punk rock. It's like, I mean, NoFX just did their last show. I think Sum 41's last show was tonight. I think I just saw that on my phone in Toronto. The Warped Tour's coming back. All these legends, the Circle Jerks, TSOL, Black Flag, these bands are touring right now. They're all playing. I saw Gorilla Biscuits play live for the first time. It's probably been 5-6 years, but I mean, or however long ago that was. But I could not believe that I was watching that while I was watching it. I felt like it was 1989 while I was standing there watching it, just losing my mind. The only thing we need is Operation Ivy and Minor Threat, and then all the boxes are checked, man. Then
that's always like that running joke, that meme that comes out like every April Fool's Day, and it's like Operation Ivy's getting back together, and everybody falls for it because we all want it,
Yeah.
When you were talking about like that, like bands that are some of them are playing their last shows, and then others are reuniting, and my wife and I went and saw Circle Jerks. Gosh, now it was maybe about a year ago. Circle Jerks and Descendants in Adolescence, and I was just like, here are these bands that are like
amazing.
from the 80s, but if you were to watch them on the stage from a distance, the energy, the movements are all the same, and it's the same way in hardcore. Like, we went and saw Murphy's Law and Agnostic Front not too long ago, or maybe like last year. Yeah. And I had Ben and Amy at the time. They were with Murphy's Law on the show. But man, they played with such energy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, some of these guys are in their 60s.
I think, isn't Vinny Stigma from Agnostic, isn't he about 70 now? He's got to be.
He is, okay. So I do tell this. Yeah.
He's something else, man. What an
I tell this story because we were talking to him at this last show. My wife and I went there, and at some point, we have talked like, hey, trying to get him on the show and stuff. But a couple of years ago, maybe even back like 2019, 2020, they came through on the East Coast and played down south, and it was his 64th birthday. And I had no clue, man, because and they were playing with Slapshot of all bands,
Oh yeah. Same
thing. Slapshot plays, and they're killing it. But we're talking to Vinny after the show, and that's what he's saying. He's like, "Hey, it's my 64th birthday and all this," and I can't help. I get excited when I'm in person talking to people, and I grab people sometimes. And we're talking, and man, I slap him on his back because that's just what we do in the South. Yeah. And I mean, he gave me a look, like, let me know he was from New York, and then I realized, like I just heavy-handed on the back of this dude, who his energy doesn't seem like he's 64.
No.
But that kind of thing, like, hey man, like, easy. But it's amazing. I think by now, whatever he is, he's probably got to be late 60s.
Yeah.
If not, whatever the math will be. But no, dude,
incredible guy.
I think there's something to be said about, when you and I, we're a few years different, but when we were young kids and we saw, adults in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, at least I know for me, they just moved a lot differently. It was almost like in their 40s and 50s, not like they'd given up, but like, I'm an old man now, And here it's nobody wants to give it up, so everybody just exercises. I think there's a big movement of like just eating healthy and knowing that.
I lost the audio. I can't hear you. Can you still hear me? Okay. I just lost. Did that do it? There it goes. You're back.
Yeah. For some reason it kicked back to a backup microphone. But no, just saying that about taking care of our bodies, exercising.
Yeah.
I mean, you stay in great shape. I'm sure that's because of firefighting, but also probably personal choices too,
Yes, totally. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like cut alcohol almost completely out of my life. I didn't drink for over a year because I was just hitting beers too hard daily. Every time we go to shows, they're free, and it became a really bad habit. And I mean, eating better. I do the F45 fitness gym. Got to plug them. They're fantastic. And I do eat some candy and junk food, I'll admit, but just, I'll have a beer when it's the right time, right place. If it's a cool brewery and we're getting lunch, I got to try one type thing, but I really don't drink, and I work out a lot. I feel great. I suffer from what I call Peter Pan syndrome, meaning that I refuse to grow up. And I am 42 and I've got kids and a family and a reputable career that I'm starting to look towards retirement. And I just keep acting like a kid. I mean, later tonight, I'm going to be rehearsing with our band because we got a big fun show to play tomorrow night. And that's my Friday. So it definitely keeps me young. I also wanted to say, when we were talking to Agnostic Front, like this memory popped in my head. Probably 6 years ago, I was on a tour. We were with Death by Stereo and Tsunami Bomb, and we were playing in Arizona. And mid-set, I leaned back and look over to my right, and our singer's kind of looking at. I was playing in Toxic Energy, and our singer's kind of looking at me. And I look behind him, and Roger Merritt from Agnostic Front is standing side stage watching us play. And it was like I had to do some yoga breaths, like, oh crap. That's Roger from Agnostic Front. Because as a kid, you saw him on a stage, and like all of a sudden I realized I think I'm an adult, and I spin around and there's Roger Merritt watching me play the guitar to a crowd of people in another state. I'm like, what is this world I'm in? And talking to him afterwards, and just, I meet a lot of the people in those bands, Circle Jerks, Adolescents. There's band members in those bands that I consider a friend of mine. And you don't know what to say to them when, they know and they get it, but it's like, you don't get it. When I was a little kid skating, I was listening to your band and saw you guys play. I never thought that we'd be on this same playing field, just rapping and hanging and doing shows. And, you're watching my band play, I'm watching your band play, and it's just this really weird, awesome thing. But that's another thing that was so great about punk rock is there are no rock stars, or at least there shouldn't be. I understand if you're Green Day, not everybody gets to talk to Billy Joe at the end of the night. But if you do get to meet Billy, I haven't. But like their drummer Trey, I've seen him out and about at a lot of stuff. He's come to small clubs. He's definitely watched my band play. Nicest dang guy in the world. Noodles from The Offspring was at the last show that my band played. The one I missed, and he was just hanging out. He's a regular dude, and punk rock is so that way. And whether I'm a fan first, but even though I play in a band too, nobody's unapproachable. No one in Taking Days is unapproachable. No one in any of those bands is unapproachable. You immediately feel like you're a part of it, and it's an incredible movement for everyone to experience. And as long as you're not, racist or violent or a hater, you're welcome to be a part of the punk rock thing.
Yeah, and I just I've never known people who were drawn to it who thought that way, because I mean, pretty quickly you realize most of the songs are, anthems to not being that way and being open-minded and that sort of thing. But absolutely. So how long have you been in Taking Days? How long has that been around?
So Taking Days, I think we're at 7 years, maybe starting our 8th year. I played in music throughout high school, and then at the end of high school, I was in a band called Barely Legal, where we were making CDs and doing little tours, playing a lot of parties and colleges and stuff. And then I got hired by the fire department and couldn't really keep it up as a new guy and as a rookie. It was just too much. I went to paramedic school and all that stuff, and it was just had to hang it up. Never thought I'd really get a chance to play music again. It went at least 10, 11, 12 years. And when I was about 35 or 36, I think, I really just started getting that itch, and I started jumping on Craigslist and looking if anybody needed a band member. And I thought, there's a whole other side of being a firefighter on shift work where there's a lot of flexibility into that schedule, and I could probably be in a band. So jammed with some people, and I found Taken Days on Craigslist. They were just getting started. They had like a demo EP out, and I went and jammed with them in 2017. It was the end of 2017, and I've been in that band ever since. I also played in Toxic Energy for 5 years. They're a fantastic band that's still going. I just don't have enough time to do multiple bands anymore. I sometimes play in Sidekick, which is another great band of my good friends, and I've jumped in on some tours and some one-offs when one of their I'm kind of a rotating member if they need a guy. But Taken Days, we are 2 full-length records out. We are on Spam Records, which a lot of people say SBAM. It's the SBAM. It's based in Austria. And tons of incredible bands, legendary and up and coming on Spam Records. Prior to that, we were on Wiretap Records, which is Los Angeles based out of Whittier. Great roster of bands on both those labels. And Taken Days is just kind of, our trajectory has from the beginning been great. But I think this day and age, there's no more like overnight success in music because CD sales are down and stuff like that. It's kind of it's a 10-year overnight success is what I call it. So we are writing, and we've demoed out like close to probably more than 20 songs for our 3rd record. There's nothing that's going to stop or slow us down. Corey and Landon are basically brothers of mine at this point, for lack of a better word. We're incestual. We spend so much time together and talk daily. And we all just love making music. We have day jobs, families, mortgages, careers. And we just love doing this music thing. And we're going to tour and do as much as we can. And we're not going anywhere. Our fan base and our listeners just keeps increasing. More and more people buy in. We win over all the rooms we play. We're just trying to get opportunities and network, meet the right people. And we appreciate every listener, and we're very approachable. Anybody can reach out to us, talk to us, come hang. Like tomorrow night when we play, we're playing with our friends in Pinstock and Stoke Signals. They're 2 like LA bands that are really cool. And anyone that comes out to see them or us, it's just kind of a party. We're all just hanging. Everybody just, there's no backstage, there's no green room. We're all just enjoying each other's company, and all the bands are going to play, and we're going to just kind of hang out. It's a pretty fun thing.
Good deal. What's the best or easiest way for people to reach out to you?
So to get Taken Days, our Instagram's probably the best spot, which is @TakenDays. We have a Facebook page. My Instagram handle is @Brent Waterworth, which is just my first and last name. You can get a hold of the band or myself through any of those avenues. And as far as listening to us, we're just like anyone. We're on every single platform that there ever was. It's anybody can be on any platform, which is good and bad. And then we're on, like I said, Spam Records. So like our latest record still has some vinyls that are available in Canada, UK, Europe, and US, and that's all through Spam Records, or you could pick one up at a show. We have a website too, takendays.net, so you can kind of link to anything and everything there. And we toured Europe last year, and we ran through like Texas and Oklahoma. Our next tour is in March, but it's West Coast. It's mostly California and Arizona. And then we've got some other tours in the pipe. So we're working on stuff. We're trying to get back to Europe, trying to get some East Coast, some Midwest, some Chicago, Pacific Northwest. There's Canada. There's lots of talk about, we know we have a lot of listeners in Canada and Australia and Japan and throughout Europe. So we just all have families and jobs. You can only tour and do so much. And it's harder than it sounds, because we'll have fans reach out like, when are you playing Germany again? And I wish it was tomorrow, but we got to kind of get invited on the festival, or we got to have a Big Brother band. Last time we did Europe, we went with Mest, which was a fantastic experience. We kind of at this point need someone to bring us. We can't really get the things booked on our own, but we appreciate people reaching out. And at this point, I've realized in our band, most of our fans will never get to see us play live, which is crazy because of a whole lifetime of playing in local bands where you're only as good as your last show, and people only really know of you from face-to-face contact. And, I saw him play here, I saw him play there, I saw him open up for these guys or those guys. But now with the way it works on social media and streaming, we have international listeners and people who really love our music and want us to come play. And it's like, it's not that easy. And it's crazy for me to think that we have people who love our band and want to meet us. And it's like, I don't know if I'm going to get to meet you. It's not a guarantee. So, but it's a beautiful thing, and we're having a fun time, and we're just going to keep making fun music. You know, I think we have a good thing going. And for other listeners, if you haven't listened to us, check us out. We're kind of like an Alkaline Trio, Face to Face, Ataris, Blink-182. We try to sound like late 90s, early 2000s pop punk. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or change the art altogether. We're just trying to do a good job at writing and playing Taken Day songs. And, you know, everyone's welcome to be a part of it as long as you're not a piece of crap.
Good deal. Good deal.
If you're a piece of crap, you're racist or sexist, you're out. But everyone else, we love you. Come hang out. Let's come find what we do have in common. You know.
Good deal. I love it. Well, Brent, I appreciate your time, buddy, and we'll get you back on here once you do some more touring and stuff like that.
Cool.
And we'll pick some other topics and talk some stuff, man.
For sure, man. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Brian.
Yes, sir. All right, buddy.
Take care.
Out.